Today, Bobby and I are going to talk about some of the psychosocial issues that come up for people with AIDS. Bobby and I have done this talk for probably about 100 times to different groups of people. Remembering that this particular part of the training brings up lots of feelings, so remember to check in with the people next to you, and if it feels good touching someone or reaching out to somebody, please feel free to do that. I think working with the AIDS epidemic for the last 2 years has probably been the most difficult work that the Shanti project has ever done. Certainly has been the most difficult work for me personally as a gay man who has been working with people in my own age group, who has struggled for much of my life to feel good and proud about being gay, who has, as many gay and lesbian people and bisexual people, experienced lots of rejection and not a lot of support in learning to accept and love myself. But nonetheless, honoring my feelings and honoring what is true for me and learning to love myself and accept myself and find joy in myself and the relationships that I have found with other gay men. And then suddenly along comes AIDS. This disease that 2 years ago was being called gay cancer, gay plague. This disease that suddenly came seemingly out of nowhere and largely affected a population that I identified myself with very closely. And largely affected people that were gay people that were in all different stages of their coming out process, in all different stages of their self-acceptance process. To love oneself is difficult for anyone, be they heterosexual or bisexual or homosexual. We're not really given a lot of encouragement in this society to really love ourselves. But then to have people like Jerry Falwell and people on the religious right tell us that this disease is a result of our lifestyle and in fact a punishment by God because of our gayness is a bit much to take. It's a bit much to see the beauty of people like Bobby Reynolds, who's with me today. And to see the beauty of many of my gay brothers. And to know the struggle that they've gone through in order to accept the beauty in themselves, which reaches out to love another person. And because that person just happens to be of the same sex, people like Mr. Falwell condemn that and find fault with that. And not only that, but then they tell you that they really do love you. Makes me wonder, what is it to really love someone? To really love someone for being who they are, not who you want them to be. To really accept someone for who they are. And to realize that in a world of so much hate, so much war, so much prejudice and bigotry, that whenever and whoever finds love, be it a man and a woman, a man and a man, a woman and a woman, that it's cause to celebrate, not to condemn. In working with people in the AIDS epidemic, you'll come up against the bigotry. You'll come up against the prejudice over and over again. You'll meet people like John, who was in Veterans Hospital. And being a military man, he had never come out. And he was diagnosed with pneumocystis. And his lover, J.B., would come to visit him in the hospital. But John wouldn't allow him to touch him because he didn't want other people to know that he was gay. John was in that hospital for 2 months. And John died in that hospital without his lover ever being able to touch him. Because John thought that he was going to recover. And if he did recover, he felt it was necessary to remain in the closet. You're going to encounter people like Don, who after his lover's death at Kaiser Hospital, his lover's parents told the nursing staff that they didn't want him to see the body of his lover. And he was prevented from going in and seeing his lover and saying goodbye to his lover, being with his lover at the last few moments of life. So what he did instead is he went and he sat by the morgue for 45 minutes. And the nurse at the morgue said, "I'm sorry, but I can't let you in to see your lover wrapped up in a sheet. You'll have to wait outside." His lover was cremated the next day. Or somebody like Tim, who left New York about 3 years ago, left his family because he felt that he could not get the support that he needed from his family in being gay. Came out to San Francisco, fell in love with a man named Chuck, set up house, did most of the things that most couples do, go to work, go to the theater, come home and sit with each other and watch television. When suddenly he was diagnosed with pneumocystis and ended up on a respirator in ICU. And then suddenly his family decides it's time to come and visit their son. Well, they do come and they do visit, but But they tell his lover Chuck that they guess it's all right if Chuck continues to stay in the house that he's been living in with his lover for the last 2 years. They guess it's all right if he goes to the ICU, as long as he doesn't get too emotional, as long as he doesn't act like a milk toast and upset his lover, or his friend was the term they were using. It's very difficult to see that type of narrow-mindedness, and yet to stay open to the client you're working with, and even stay open to the family members, but also, despite their bigotry, despite their prejudice, need support as well. In the last 2 years, we've worked with about 300 people with AIDS and about 600 family members, friends, and lovers. I think the AIDS epidemic has affected everyone in San Francisco, regardless if they're straight or gay or bisexual. There's a lot of grief in the city. There's grief that comes from struggling to be free, struggling to be who you are, and then suddenly being faced with an epidemic that has continued to grow and has continued to take many lives. An epidemic that we don't understand, that we don't know how to stop, that we can stop for periods of time, but certainly we haven't found a way to cure it. I think every gay and lesbian person in the city now personally knows of someone that has AIDS and is dealing with that type of loss, that type of grief. Then you have people like Harry, who's been diagnosed with pneumocystis NKS. He's been living with his lover Mark for about 3 years. And he went home about a month ago to his answering machine, and he was playing back the messages, and apparently some teenage girls had called and had left the message, are you gay? Do you have AIDS? Do you have herpes? I'm sorry. Perhaps I could help. They didn't know that Harry had AIDS. But I mean, it's that type of prejudice, that type of ignorance that not only people with AIDS, but gay and lesbian people encounter through much of their life. What Harry did with that message was he sat down and he cried for an hour. And he cried the tears of knowing in your heart of your own beauty. He cried the tears of knowing the rightness of who he is and how wonderful the love that Mark and he share, how wonderful that love is. And he cried the tears that come from looking at the ignorance of life and seeing people's inhumanity to other people. It's part of life. We have to accept it. As gay people, we walk down the street arm in arm with our lover, and we're called faggot from car windows, or have bottles thrown at us. Or just a few days ago, there was a man and a woman running down the street on the street that I live at, and The man was obviously quite drunk, and he was chasing the woman down the street, and he grabbed her and he started to beat her. And I was sitting out on my balcony. It was about 11 o'clock at night, watching the stars with my lover, Jess, and I took my glass of Coke and I threw it at him. And I said, God damn it, leave her alone. And he did leave her alone. He stopped, and she ran away from him, and he turned up and he said, oh, shut up, dickhead. Those type of living experiences are very common, and I think that people forget that. I think that people look at San Francisco and they think, oh, what a liberated city, and oh, how easy it is for gay people here. We've heard a lot about gay liberation over the last 10 years, and people think, well, my God, they have their rights, That type of persecution is a daily experience. It's a daily experience for many women, for many third world people, and for gay and lesbian people who choose not to hide the fact that they're gay, that they're lesbian, or that they're bisexual. And then you come along and you add AIDS to that. You think being gay is difficult. How about being gay and having AIDS at the same time? That's what we're going to talk about today. And what I'd like to do with Bobby is basically talk about some of the feelings that people with AIDS experience, and starting with diagnosis. We're also going to be doing some role plays in this part to actually try to demonstrate how to work with people at various stages of dealing with a life-threatening disease. The most important thing, I think, is that with diagnosis, to remember being diagnosed with AIDS is being diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. So the feelings that someone's going to encounter, although somewhat different, are also very similar to the feelings that anyone will experience when being diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. The initial feeling is one of shock, of numbness, of total disbelief. This is added to by the stereotypes that have been depicted of people with AIDS. People have portrayed people with AIDS as being very sexually active, of being drug crazed, of being slightly less than human. I can remember when I started to work with people with AIDS 2 years ago, I was petrified of meeting one of them. In the press, they had been portrayed as sort of degenerate, as people that were out having sex all the time, that were using poppers, that basically did nothing but drugs and have sex. I mean, that was essentially the stereotype that was being portrayed. The first man I met with AIDS was David, and I can remember standing outside of his door, afraid of what I was going to find inside. I thought there'd be slings hanging from the ceiling, and we wouldn't be able to talk about anything that that was going to be different than that you could usually talk about with somebody that was facing a life-threatening illness. Because he was going to have this really sort of limited consciousness, and if we talked about sex and drugs, it would be all right, but that was about it. What I found instead was a 52-year-old man who had been married for 14 years and had come out about 7 years ago, had been with a lover for about 1.5 years, who was in the last stages of Kaposi sarcoma, who was covered with probably about 700 lesions, who had decided to die at home, and whose daily activity basically consisted of lying down in his bed, which was a mattress, in his living room. And when he needed to go to the bathroom, basically crawling to the toilet, the lesions had gone up his anus and had coalesced in a way that it was very painful for him to move. And in the first hour of our conversation, we talked about metaphysics. We talked about how AIDS had made him aware of how beautiful people were, how he had an increasing understanding of what life was, of what the essence of life was, that it was really just of being in the moment and of opening up to the beauty that was around him, especially the beauty that was in people. We didn't talk about sex or drugs at all. We talked about what he thought was going to happen after he died. We talked about the sadness of him leaving his lover. We talked about him saying goodbye to his ex-wife. We talked about how he wanted the final moments of his life to be and who he wanted to be there. So I think the most important thing to realize that in diagnosis, the issues that people are going to be dealing with are going to be very similar to the issues that anybody deals with when they're first diagnosed with a life-threatening disease. The stereotypes, despite those stereotypes and how we've done so much education to try to debunk those myths, and in Shanti, we've done that by every time we present before a forum or before a group of people, we bring people with AIDS to speak for themselves so that people can see that they don't have horns and that they are indeed people just like themselves. And that has been very effective. But despite that, people that are diagnosed with AIDS still often buy into those stereotypes themselves. And they're doubly shocked that they have AIDS because they think that the only people that get AIDS are people that are very sexually active, that have lots of anonymous sexual partners, or that use lots of drugs. So the feeling that's or the question that's very normal for most people with life-threatening illness, why me, is all the more felt when you feel that you don't fit into those stereotypes. If you have led a life that's been fairly sexually active, somebody once described promiscuous as somebody that's getting more than you, which sort of makes sense. sort of a nebulous word. But if you have led a life that's fairly sexually active, you might find yourself feeling guilty, thinking that somehow you brought this disease upon yourself. In working with somebody with diagnosis, that's first diagnosed, first of all, for physicians, it's most important that the diagnosis is done in person. We've had horror stories of how physicians have diagnosed people over the phone. That's just not the way to do it. You don't tell somebody they have AIDS or tell somebody they have a life-threatening illness over the phone. There was one man that was diagnosed in a similar way and was not referred to any agencies like Shanti or any type of counseling agencies where he could process his feelings, and 2 days later he hung himself. Diagnosis from the physician's point of view is a very serious point in the relationship between the doctor and the patient. And physicians really need to make time to do that in person with their patients and to make sure that they can refer their patients to someone to process the feelings that come up after diagnosis. As a counselor in working with someone that's just been diagnosed, expect to interact with a person that's going to be all over the place, someone that's going to be talking about, what am I going to do about work? Am I going to tell my parents? What about my lover? What type of treatment am I going to go on? I just can't believe this is happening to me. Is it happening to me? I mean, there's going to be moments where you're going to think, my God, this person is acting like they're crazy. And indeed, they are going to be partially crazy as they start the very gradual process of incorporating into their consciousness that they've just been diagnosed with a life-threatening disease. Don't try to get a person that's just been diagnosed to talk about a particular issue, because that's not where their focus is. I mean, it's very difficult for them to focus in on what should I tell my employer, because as soon as they start to think about that, 15 other thoughts come up that they're going to want to jump into. So as a counselor, it's most important that you're very flexible in your counseling interactions with someone that has just been diagnosed. Reality setting is helpful. Someone that's just been diagnosed, may think, I'm going to be dead in 3 months, because they've heard about the horror statistics, they've heard about all the people that have died of AIDS, and they may indeed feel that in 3 months, that's it, that's going to be the end of their life. So some reality setting from your point of view is helpful. If you can say things like, well, there have been people with KS that have lived longer than 3 years. There have been people with pneumocystis that have been successfully treated and are living normal lives now that are continuing working. That type of reality setting is very helpful. It's not the time to jump in and do death and dying counseling when somebody is just diagnosed. If somebody's just diagnosed to you and they say, I'm going to die from this, it's not the time to say, yes, you possibly are. How do you feel about that? That's not the type of interaction. The interaction is basically trying to widen their information, widen their scope of how other people with AIDS are coping with the disease. This is a little different in pneumocystis. In pneumocystis, sometimes the disease, when they're not able to successfully treat it, the course of the disease is downhill and fairly quick. If a person doesn't respond to medicine or treatment that they're using on that person for pneumocystis in 2 to 3 weeks, you'll start to get a feel from the medical staff that things aren't looking good, that things aren't working out. Then it may be time, or then it is time, to begin the process of helping that person to prepare for the end. But they are successfully treating pneumocystis now. I forget what the percentages are on that. I think it's 75% for the first case of pneumocystis. So I think I'll stop there. And Bobby, if you could talk about what it was like for you personally when you were diagnosed with KS, and maybe tell us a little bit about yourself apart from AIDS first.
Who am I? I was born and raised in San Francisco at St. Francis Hospital, which they have torn down to make a parking lot. My first years in school, I lived on Sutter Street right off of Polk Street. I used to travel Polk Street all the time. It was my home. And at that time, it was very different. And I had no idea that it was where a lot of gay people lived. I guess in 1954, my family moved out to the Avenues, and I became one of those guys on the other side of the peaks. I went to a Catholic grammar school after that, and then I went to Reardon, which is out by City College. And it wasn't until I started working I guess in 1965 downtown, that I realized we had sun during the summer. It was a big surprise to come through the tunnel and see sunshine in the middle of June and July. I read a lot of mysteries. I love to read. I like to cook. I do a lot of gardening. I've played on the softball team for Moby Dick for the last 3 years in the Gay Softball League. And for about 12 years now, I guess, I've been playing volleyball on weekends with an informal group that meets. And then, in June of 1982, things changed. Going back a little bit before that, one day in March, I was at work and I had crossed my legs and my socks had slid down and I saw this funny spot. And there was a part of me that knew exactly what it was. It's one of those KS lesions, but I couldn't allow myself to acknowledge that. I looked at my other ankle and there was one there too, so there was two things I couldn't acknowledge, so I stuffed that away. Every so often I'd get up the courage to look and they were still there. I guess it was in April of '82 that I finally got the courage to show my lover Mark this funny flea bite that I had scratched, and look at this scab, it's still here, it hasn't gone away. 2 weeks later I says, you know, that scab's still here, I wonder what it is. All this time ignoring and denying what I knew it was. Towards the end of May, we had planned on going up to the Russian River for a week's vacation, and I was having a little trouble with a chest cold or something. I get upper respiratory infections a lot. And so I decided I'd go into the doctor, and I called up and I said, Sunshine, which is what I call the nurse, I want to come in and see the doc, and I have this funny spot on my leg I'd like him to look at. And she says, oh no! And I laughed and giggled and made a joke and then forget it. So I went in, and I remember out in the office before I went into the examining room, I says, I'm going to show you something, but I don't want you to tell me what I think it is because I didn't have any of the fun getting it that all those guys have done. The stereotypes, fast life livers, you know, fast lane. I can be pretty dull sometimes. I didn't think I'd earned all that. Well, he had a surprise for me. He had evidently, as a resident, worked with the classical Capaces in older Mediterranean men and knew, just looking at it and touching it, that it was, and that's what he said. And I didn't want to hear that. So I left there thinking, well, he's wrong. And he'd scheduled me for a biopsy, and the next day I went to the dermatologist, and the dermatologist looked through those magnifying glasses, it's all lit up, and very professional. And he says, I think it's a blood blister. And I said, thank you very much, I'll take that. So he cut them off, and he said, don't go in the river for a few days, you might get some germs in there. And that was it. I went on vacation, ignoring it. When I come back, everything will be fine. Except there was one night, I think it might have been Tuesday of the next week. It was a full moon, and I stayed at my favorite place is the Willows. And they have a deck with a hot tub and wonderful flowers. And at that time, there were lots of petunias, purple and white ones. And I remember sitting there by myself in the hot tub and looking at the full moon and the stars, and just how incredibly pretty and peaceful and calm. And you may have KS. No, I don't. That was it for the week. I came back to work on the next Monday, and I knew it was going to be good news. So when I called up, I called the doctor. I called up and I said, okay, give me the good news. And she says, just a minute, the doctor wants to talk to you. And I knew all along that he was going to tell me that it was positive. I can't remember much of what he said. I mean, I think the body defenses started kicking in right then. I started breathing heavy, I started shaking, I started tearing, although I wouldn't allow myself to cry. I got real watery. He said that somebody was going to call me. I do remember that, and I hung the phone up, and I sat there for a minute and took a deep breath, and I wobbly pushed myself up and walked across the hall to my boss, and I said, "Ted, they just told me I have cancer. What am I going to do?" He stuck his hands in his pocket and looked at me and says, "Oh shit, Robert, I have no idea." Looking back on it, it was a real difficult day to go through. It felt like the roof had fallen around me and there was a lot of dust and I couldn't see very clearly. I couldn't focus. I'd find myself coming to having stared off into space. I was functioning like a robot, doing my work, answering the phones, being very polite and very matter of fact. I decided I wasn't going to tell anyone. I was going to be very strong. I especially wasn't going to tell Mark, and then I realized, well, that's real dumb because he's going to know. Gradually, I did go home and tell Mark, and I did tell a few people here and there. And it's hard doing that. It was real difficult to see the pain and the hurt. I don't think I'll ever forget his face when I told him. And as word got out, at that time it wasn't known as AIDS. It was the gay plague or the gay cancer. But at work I just told them that I have cancer. And you know how big offices are. If they don't have rumors, they'll create them, right? Well, I ended up with leukemia, chest cancer. Did they say I was like, I think somebody said I had a mastectomy even. I thought that was, I think that's a little overachieving. So there was that whole part where I felt compelled to touch bases with all the people that I knew and tell them personally. And then there's the doctor's appointments. I got so much advice from friends. Give me your picture and I'll stick it in a box under a blue light and that'll help you. You should read this book. You should not do chemotherapy. You should do this. You should drink wheatgrass and coffee enemas. What was I going to do with all this juggling and numb? I really honestly don't remember a lot that went on. I have to rely on people that have told me. Mark went with me to the doctors a couple of times and said, this is what happened, and he had to tell me 3 and 4 times. They'd come in and give me something to do at work, and I'd have to go across the hall and say, what did you just tell me to do? I'd put somebody on hold and I couldn't remember. I mean, it's like from here to there to go get the file, and I couldn't remember the address once I'd gotten up there. That's not like me at all. It really, I'm going crazy. You know, this isn't me. I just want to tell him about what Rick did for me when I got him as a counselor. I called Shanti and talked to Jim, and that helped a lot. And then went to support group and met other people like me. So I didn't feel as alone. And then I was given Rick. And he was somebody that I could bounce all this craziness off of. What do you think of this blue light theory? And what about wheatgrass? And what about chemotherapy? And this is what I think. And he just let me talk and talk. And he didn't mind that I was staring off into space, or I'd repeat myself 12 times. And he was also somebody safe that I could talk to. You know, I was very protective of my friends at that time. I couldn't talk to them about a lot of things, but Rick I could. He was my counselor. I could say anything to him. That was really important. Okay.
What we'd like to do is to role play someone that's just been diagnosed, and The role play is going to be very short. It's only going to be for 5 minutes or so, but at least it will give you an idea, hopefully. I'll probably even say more than I usually would, since I feel like I should say something since we're being videotaped. Since this is a training and whatnot. But the idea is to give you just how a situation might start off with someone that's just been diagnosed. And hopefully you can pick up on more of the feeling, the presence that I think is required more than what is actually said. Okay. Hi, Bob. I'm Jim from the Shanti Project.
Hi, Jim. Nice to meet you.
I got a little information about your diagnosis of KS. Do you know about Shanti? Did you?
It was on the list of appointments and things, and I got to the bottom and said, call Shanti. So.
Basically, we're an organization that works with people with life-threatening illness. And I'm here basically for you to talk with about whatever you'd like to talk about. And hopefully we can become friends in the process. And hopefully I can provide you some support. I've worked with a few other people with AIDS. And when were you diagnosed?
It's been about, seems like a lifetime. I guess it was about 2 weeks. Yeah, it's been 2 weeks. It's 9:15, Monday morning.
Has it been sort of a crazy period since then? Just
you got it.
all over the place, huh? Yeah.
I've never been through anything like this before. It's real nuts out. Do you want some coffee?
Sure, I'd like some. Great.
I think there's
some cream and sugar.
I think I'm out of cream.
Oh, this will be great. Okay.
There's all sorts of people giving me all this advice about treatment. And do you know anything about treatment?
I know a little bit. I know that the two major traditional forms are the chemotherapy and the interferon, and that some people are trying some alternative stuff too. Has your doctor talked to you about treatment, or?
I'm not to that stage yet. I have to go through some more tests.
One thing I know is that the chemotherapy they're using, it's Valban, and the side effects aren't as dramatic. I know I used to think the chemotherapy, my hair was going to fall out and I was going to lose weight and all this stuff, but it's a very mild form of chemotherapy, and it doesn't have a lot of side effects. So I don't know what your feelings were about chemotherapy, but I know I certainly had a lot of negative feelings about it.
I've heard a lot about that interferon stuff that's coming out. I don't know. My neighbor lady gave me this book about wheatgrass juice and coffee enemas.
Everybody has the answer, huh?
Yeah. What about sex? You know, I'm real scared to touch my lover. You know, I'm afraid I might give him something. That's. We've been together for 4 years, and I feel, and I don't know what to say to the people at work. You know, they think I've got all these crazy cancers, and
just a lot of different issues.
Yeah.
What's your lover's name? Your lover's name. What's your lover's name?
Mark.
How long have you been together?
For over 4 years.
4 years. How'd you meet?
At softball. He was playing second base. No, he was playing shortstop, and I was playing third base. And he had a headband and frizzy hair and a beard, and I said, "Who's that cute little hippie?" It doesn't look like that now.
Have you been talking a lot with him since you've been diagnosed?
I don't know what to say to him. I don't know what to say to him. He doesn't know what's going on either. He doesn't understand why I got it.
Has he been acting like he's afraid at all of you? Or because I know you said you were afraid of giving it to him. Has he been pulling back at all? Or?
No. He gives me lots of hugs and kisses and things still. I can't remember the last time I had an erection. It's just, I don't even think about that stuff.
What happens with most men after being diagnosed with AIDS, Bobby, is that they lose their sexual feelings for a while, but they come back usually after about 3 months or so. Usually you're just in such a shocked period that you don't feel sexual. A lot of people experience that.
I took my dog for a walk the other day.
Did you?
Yeah. We went up shopping, and she's a little sweetie. I like her a lot.
Have you had her a long time?
15 years.
Really? All right.
Yeah. I was a little scared to go out, It's like the lesions are on my ankles, but I figure people are going to stare me in the face and know I've got it.
You sort of feel different than before then, like somehow people will look at you differently.
Yeah.
What are you feeling right now?
I guess just sort of blank. It just blank.
Well, I'm planning on spending about 2 hours with you today, so we don't need to keep talking all the time. I'm fine with just sitting with you too, and I'd like to actually see your house. You look like you have a nice house.
Oh yeah,
You lived here a long time?
I've been here 7 years.
Great.
I'd like to show you my family album.
I'd love to see it. Great. Let's stop there. So that would be a fairly typical role play or interaction with someone that's just diagnosed. Bobby, brought up lots of issues, and I would go into the issues a little bit. Sometimes I would let them slide altogether, like the first time he brought up sex with his lover Mark. I decided to start with when he met Mark rather than the issue of sex, So, a lot of times you forget that in counseling with somebody. You get so tuned into you have to say something or you have to respond to exactly what the person has said that you forget that you can also talk about the dog and the house and the family album and Bobby playing baseball and where he met Mark and all that stuff too. Particularly with somebody that's just been diagnosed, that type of relief and that type of the ability to just sort of change the subject, which he's doing anyway, and if you can sort of get into that a little bit with him, then he's going to feel more comfortable with his own doing that. Like if you sort of join him in that. All those issues, you're just starting a relationship with somebody, and you're going to have lots of time to get into all of those different issues that he brought up. You don't have to do it in this counseling session or even in the next counseling session. Bobby, you want to talk a little bit about how that felt for you?
A lot of it brought back a lot from the beginning when it was like going through it all over again. Sometimes I didn't even know he was there. and it was just sort of a body that I could talk to. And I tuned out several times, just sort of stared off into space and then focused back. But he was there. I could tell he was there when I did tune in.
People that are just diagnosed, they'll hear every fourth sentence. It's not a time for advice giving. Really, it's never a time for advice giving in counseling, but particularly in diagnosis. I think we'll move on into the next section, which is treatment. Basically, the only issues that I want to cover in treatment is that treatment is a real difficult choice to make for someone that's just diagnosed, because it essentially is their life, and they're deciding on what method of healing they're going to use to get better, essentially. A lot of us have very heavy concepts about traditional medicine. It's really important for us to put those concepts aside when we're helping someone make up their own mind on what choice they're going to use in terms of method of treatment. It's also important, if you know particular things, like knowing that the chemotherapy that they're using with people with KS doesn't have a lot of devastating side effects. If you can bring in information like that, that's not helping him that's not advising him, it's just giving him a broader picture of what to expect, so he can make a more informed decision. The frustrating thing about treatment is that although they've been able to stop the KS successfully, the growth of new lesions, they haven't been able to cure the underlying problem, which is AIDS. People with AIDS know that. It's not like, they're not going to get that. So they, for the most part, don't withhold information from them on various treatments. I mean, it really is a time for them to get as much information as they can about chemotherapy and interferon, or whatever particular alternative therapy they're thinking on using. If somebody starts to talk to you about coffee enemas and vegetable juice every hour, it's not the time to act like that's not a viable method of treatment. Ask about what they know about the diet. Ask if you can help them find out more information. Ask them if they've talked to anybody personally that's been on this type of therapy. The more information you can get them, the more informed decision they're going to be able to make. Sometimes they'll make a decision that will go against what you feel. Oftentimes people that are newly diagnosed will decide to do nothing. They'll decide that they won't take any treatment at all. They'll just wait and see. If you meet with them week to week and you see that the lesions are continuing and maybe they are trying megavitamin therapy or something like that, there may be part of you that really wants to tell them, to advise them, hey, listen, this isn't working, take chemotherapy. You can explore with them if they're at all reconsidering their initial choice. Maybe you can say to them, well, Bob, you've been on megavitamin therapy now for 6 months. Your lesions are continuing to increase. Have you considered increasing the amount of vitamin intake you're doing, or have you thought about possibly thinking of another type of therapy? An open-ended question like that, one that's going to help them explore and communicate to you what they've been thinking about, is fine, but it's not the time to come in and tell them that you feel it's not working and they should do this. Sex is probably one of the most difficult issues, or is maybe the most difficult issue at certain times anyway for people with AIDS. The messages about sexual activity for people with AIDS has been constantly confusing. 2 years ago it was fine for people with AIDS to be sexual. Then it was, well, since your own immune system is compromised, you should be careful not to pick up somebody else's infection. Then it was, well, maybe it's possible that you have a virus and therefore you should limit the amount of your sexual partners. Then it was about 8 months ago, don't have any sex at all if you have AIDS. And now we're talking about safer ways of sexual activity for people with AIDS. To be suddenly diagnosed with an illness and to be with a lover, or to be without a lover, but to suddenly see your sexual energy, your love-making abilities as something that's possibly going to cause somebody else to die is a pretty heavy thought to let in. The possibility that you may be spreading or passing a virus which has the potential of giving someone a life-threatening illness is a very heavy realization. Particularly when they haven't found the virus yet. Particularly when nobody knows if indeed people are infectious after being diagnosed with AIDS. For a physician to expect a person with AIDS to suddenly stop being sexual, or for us to suddenly expect our client to deal with a great deal of social consciousness, to being able to having to make major changes in their sexual relationships is a lot to expect. For a person with AIDS who has been fairly active sexually, who's had a number of varying partners, who has relied on sex as a means for relationship, as a means for stress reduction, as a means for comfort, to suddenly be asked to stop that type of relating at a time when they're probably dealing with the most intense stress of their life, that of having a life-threatening illness, is very difficult. Persons with AIDS at the Second National AIDS Forum in Denver, Colorado this year drafted their own statement about sexuality, and in that statement they said that persons with AIDS have a moral and ethical obligation to inform potential sex partners that they have AIDS, but that they also have a right to as full and satisfying sexual and emotional life as any other person. Some doctors feel fine about condoms in terms of preventing the AIDS virus. In terms of safer sex, we have things like hugging and mutual masturbation. But for a person with AIDS, the bottom line is that if they're ever going to have sex with someone else again, they first have to identify themselves as a person with AIDS. So that if you're attracted to somebody and they're attracted to you, and you both feel like getting to know each other better and going home together and sharing each other's company that night, you first have to go through the painful self-disclosure that you have AIDS, and you have to risk the very real possibility of being rejected. People with AIDS that have taken that risk, that have told people that they have AIDS, have had people literally run out of bars, have had people that have overheard their conversation ask them to leave. How dare they come into a social situation like a bar situation? So these are the issues that your clients that wish to have some type of intimacy, some type of sexual, some type of body intimacy, these are the type of issues that they're going to be dealing with. They're going to have to be dealing with self-disclosing themselves continually. First of all, feeling like they have this, like they're a leper, like they have this disease that they're going to pass on to somebody else. Then finding somebody that they do like, that they're attracted to, disclosing themselves to that person, and then running the risk of rejection and being rejected by that person. And then they're going to come to you for support. There's been a lot of talk about people with AIDS that continue to have sex without using any types of precaution. I haven't encountered those people. I'd like to know where they are. What I've encountered instead in Shanti is a group of men that realize the possibility and accept the possibility that indeed maybe something could be passed from them to somebody else in intimate sexual activity. And I've met a group of men that have made very painful and very difficult changes in their life, their habits, in order not to put other people at risk of getting AIDS. I wonder how many of us could make those same changes if suddenly diagnosed with a disease like AIDS. Bobby, you want to talk about how AIDS has affected your sexual life?
When I was diagnosed, I think I mentioned that there were two things going on. I really wasn't feeling sexual, and I was also afraid of being sexual with Mark until I found out some more. I really didn't feel comfortable about having sex with him until he went and had some testing done, and he's healthy as a horse. And then it was like the dam burst, and I couldn't get enough, or the little kid out. Well, that went on for a while, and we did a lot of talking during that period. And we were still doing everything we did before. And I thought it was okay with him. My birthday is in October. And last year, one of the packages was very small. I like small packages, so I saved it for almost last. And when I opened it up, it was a box of rubbers. And I said something flippant and giggled and laughed, and inside I was hurting. He hadn't talked to me about his fear. Our next adjustment was that I wouldn't inseminate him in any way. And lately I find him pulling away and not wanting to have sex with me as often as I would like to. I'm going to play true confessions. I haven't talked to him about it. I'm afraid to. I'm afraid of that rejection. For a long time in group, we'd talk about doing an ad in the personals column. And there was part of me that wanted to do it and part of me that just talked about it. And then one of the papers I saw was giving free ads. And I talked to somebody connected with the paper and I said, would my confidentiality, could it be guaranteed if I put an ad in there and you collected my mail and forwarded it on? And I finally wrote an ad. I think it was something like, person with AIDS would like to have safe sex. I want to be held and touched and made love to by a sensitive, caring man. Are you someone that can go through your fear and meet me on the other side? And that was a big step. I still haven't told Mark that I put that ad in the paper. I've gotten one response, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. It's a crazy thing. It's like the person that was this whole complete person where I could do things without having to worry. And now I'm this other person that has to be concerned all the time. I get real tired of it, you know. I connect with a lot of people that I would really like to do something with, and I'm afraid. I can't stand any more rejection. I just can't deal with that. And I also hunger. And how do you balance that out?
Just as the need for love continues after being diagnosed with AIDS, so does the need for sexual activity. And there are ways for people that have AIDS to continue to have a satisfying sexual life, growing, active life after being diagnosed with AIDS. And they'll have to find out what that way is going to be with the person that they're with. And they're going to need our support in making changes, if changes have to be made, if new ways have to be found. But the reality is that there is a place for a full and satisfying sex life after being diagnosed for a person with AIDS. And it's important for us as counselors to support that. The next issue we'd like to touch on is attitudes towards death and survival. You know, a lot of us feel that, that a diagnosis of AIDS is going to mean the fact that the person is going to die. And a lot of us feel that, I think, perhaps in our gut. I know there was a time in my life where I felt in my gut that no matter how well a person like Bobby was doing, there was going to come a point, probably within a 1 to 3 year period, where he was going to die of AIDS. I don't believe that anymore. And I don't think that's denial or false hope. I think that's believing in a world, perhaps not of miracles, but a world of where things are constantly being discovered. And I think with the money that is being put into research and whatnot, there is a good chance that a drug will be found that will treat AIDS, the underlying problem. I also believe in spontaneous remissions. I mean, we've all heard of cancer patients that have been in the last stages of cancer, and they've either gone to the Simonton workshop in Texas, or they've taken on some type of visualization or whatever, or just for some unknown reason, some unknown medical reason, they've gone into a spontaneous remission. So when working with persons with AIDS, I find that it's important for me to hold on to that possibility at all points when I'm working with them. And if I can successfully do that, if I can be in the moment with them, and not 6 months from now, not thinking what's going to happen 6 months from now, but if I can just be in this moment of survival, if that's where indeed they're at. If I'm looking at somebody and they have 50 lesions and they're on chemotherapy and they're telling me what they're going to be doing in 3 years, I'm not going to be 3 years from that point. I'm going to be right there with them, and I'm going to emotionally join them in that struggle for survival, as well as intellectually. Anything is possible in this moment, and I think as counselors that's exactly where we need to be, is in this moment with the person we're working with. So it is possible for me to work with somebody like Timmy, who was on a respirator for 4 months in the ICU, and he had pneumocystis, herpes zoster. He was on kidney dialysis. He had about 5 IVs going into his body, and daily he was running a temperature of about 103. And I worked with him for 4 months, and we worked on visualization, we worked on life-affirming exercises. I did a lot of touching with him, polarity type touching, touching his heart, touching his forehead, trying to send or to communicate a feeling of peace to him. He was unable to talk, being that he was on the respirator, and he was just all hooked up in this room, this isolation room in the ICU situation. I brought in music. I played music for him. We talked about feeling peaceful, about working with his breath, feeling the love of his family around him, the love of his lover around him, the love of myself that I was trying to communicate to him. He responded wonderfully to all of that. Twice during that 4-month period, I brought up the possibility of him dying. And the way I did that was something like, Timmy, they've been trying all these drugs and not much seems to be working. Are there times when you feel like giving up? Each time, each of those 2 times that I would bring that up, he'd turn his head away from me, which was a real clear message that that's not where he was at. That's where I was at. That's what I was thinking I would be feeling if I was where he was at. But that's not where he was at. I feel okay about having asked him that, because by asking him that, I gave him the opportunity, if he wanted to pursue that line of discussion. But I also felt very comfortable about shifting immediately and going back into healing, going back into visualization, going back into his wish to survive. His doctor told him that his chances were 1 in 10,000, but he was going to be that 1 in 10,000. It was only 4 hours before his death that I walked into the room and talked to him about the fact that I felt that he was not going to live much longer, because his blood pressure was down to like 60/30, and the doctors essentially said, this is it, it's a matter of hours. At that time, he looked right at me, and we did talk about dying, and we communicated with our eyes, and we acknowledged the fear and the terror and also our connection. It's real important to let the disease be the teacher. As counselors, we're not there to be emotional safecrackers. We're not there to break through somebody's denial, if indeed it is denial. We're there to join somebody emotionally where they're at, and to support somebody with where they're at. That's a difficult dance to do. It's difficult when part of you feels like, this is it, they're not going to make it. But you'll find so many times with your clients that they'll come close to the point when you think, this is it, they're going to die, and suddenly up they go again, and it's another 4 months, and they're doing well. talk about the issues of dying. I'm not saying don't talk about those issues, but I'm saying that the disease itself will be the teacher. The disease will let them know when it's time that their body is going to give up. And we're there basically to go along the journey with them, not to take them to any given point. Discover what the given point is going to be with them. Don't assume that you know it ahead of them. Bobby, you've seen a lot of your brothers die of AIDS, and I'm wondering how you find the energy to go on living and not seeing yourself as dying in a relatively short time, but seeing yourself in a process of recovery and renewal.
I never really know how to answer that question when it's asked me. I guess the way I do things is I sit with it for a while inside. I go someplace quiet and sit and just read my murder mysteries or stare out the window at the flowers in the backyard, or just space out somewhere. I guess the reality is that I may die from this. I don't see that as being soon. Again, is that denial or what? I remember last year, for a day or two, it was on my mind that I wasn't going to see my birthday, which was a couple of months away. And I was afraid to talk about that. People will think I'm crazy. At support group that night, there was just Jim and the other facilitator and myself, and for some reason that was, I just blurted it out. And in talking about it, he asked me if I'd told Mark, and I said, no, I can't tell Mark that. But I went home that night and sat across from him and looked him in the eye and said, I need to talk to you, and I feel like I may die from this. And we talked. The next morning, it was as if I'd never had that thought. It seemed like verbalizing that thought allowed me to let go of it. I can't tell you that it hasn't come across. 3:30 in the morning sometimes you wake up and I've done things like when I took a leave of absence from work, I sold some stock and I went out and I bought a new video recorder and a new TV and a new stereo. I figured if I was going to go, I was going to enjoy what time I had left. I really think I notice the quality of life now that I never used to take the time to do before. And I really treat myself special when I need to. I've learned those times. Seeing my friends die, oh God. There's been so many. It's difficult for me to put into words sometimes what it's like. This special bond that people with AIDS have with each other. I can hear a name and become connected to them some way. I don't know where I find the strength to deal with that. I just go into myself and come out a day or two later and start all over again. I'd like to tell you what's going on with me right now, though. I have a very good friend who I met in January. His name is Gary, and it was his idea to do the candlelight march that we had here in May. Since that time, I have grown to love that man a lot. And just Thursday I had the chance to actually talk to him about things we'd never said to each other before. And I told him that I felt that he had become my best friend. And we both cried on the phone. And he told me that he felt I was third most important in his life, that I was more important to him than his nephew. Whew. That was incredible to let that in. What I'm being able to do with Gary is share this dying experience that he's going through. He really feels that it's very close to the end. I've not been able to do that with my family, my mom, my dad, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. I haven't been able to do that with any of the other guys that I've had to watch die. But Gary's giving me this incredible gift. And it's going to hurt like hell. I can't take that away. I can't help the other people that have to go through that. I can't help them go through it. But I think somehow that we're all going to be better. And I wouldn't give this up, no matter how hard it's going to be. And I guess maybe that's where I get some of my strength, is from my brothers that are going through the same thing.
This is mostly to the video audience than you all hear, but the issue of grief, so many people don't view gay, lesbian relationships as valid or as meaningful as heterosexual relationships. And I think from the way that Bobby has talked about Gary, hopefully you can see that the relationships that gay and lesbian people form are just as valid, are just as poignant, are just as real, are just as full of emotion as anyone's relationship. And oftentimes in the grieving process, the lover of somebody with AIDS is sort of on the outside. So anything we can do to validate the love, to validate the beauty that we as gay people feel towards one another, that we as people with AIDS feel towards one another, is most important in the grieving process, since that validation doesn't come from traditional places. Next issue we'd like to talk about is body image. Bobby, would you like to talk about body? Maybe Alex.
There's all sorts of things involved in body image. There's opening your mouth and watching a lesion grow down your throat, and waiting for treatment because the doctor says interferon's the best for you. Putting all your hope in that and then finding out you're allergic to the interferon, and what do you do now? There's softball. I loved to play softball. I wasn't wonderful. I had a good stretch for my teammates on first base. You know, I could really get that ball when they threw it in the dirt. But this year, I was afraid that I couldn't do it. That I couldn't run the bases if I hit the ball. That I wouldn't have the stamina to get in there and stay and be part of the team. Counting the lesions, you know, after the first X number, you just sort of forget about it. I around Christmas last year, I saw this little spot on my face that I knew was the start of a lesion, and I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't, because it was there every time I did look in the mirror. And also, there is the issue of dealing with your friends, who we become very fond of, very, very fond of. Alex is someone very special to me. I met him the first day I was going into the clinic for my treatment. I ended up taking chemotherapy when I couldn't get the interferon. And he was more advanced than anyone I'd seen. He had lesions on his face, and his hair was thinning, and I found out later he'd had pneumocystis. But when I walked in, he looked up and he smiled and said hello. And then gradually, week by week, we got to know each other. My lover and I went to New York and Florida for a trip that was planned way before my diagnosis, and Alex went home to New Orleans where his lover's family was, so we didn't see each other for about 2 months with the holidays and our vacations. And I guess it was the first Monday in January this year that I went in for my treatment that I saw Alex. I saw him get out of the elevator, and he was being helped by his lover and by one of the clerks there on the ward. And he was walking all stoop-shouldered and real slow, and I was torn. You know, I didn't want to go see. I just knew something was wrong, and I didn't want to go up there. And at the same time, that's my friend. That's Alex. So what I did was I walked down the hall and turned the corner and stood there with this funny smile frozen on my face, because when I got there, Alex was, it wasn't who I knew, it was Alex. It was this face that looked like a full moon because it was all swollen. And it was bright purple. All the lesions had just grown together. And his eyes were swollen shut. Just little slits. And I wanted to scream. I wanted to pound the doctors in the face for letting this happen to Alex. I wanted to run away. I wanted to grab him up in my arms and hold him and make it all better. And what I did was crouch down and tell him about the football game I saw the day before, and I wished him Happy New Year 6 times. It's hard. I left, finally. He was getting tired. It was real hard for him to talk. And I went and locked myself in the bathroom. And I looked. And initially I looked at the lesion. It was right under my eye. And then my face became Alex's face, all swollen and purple and puffy. And I thought to myself, how long is it going to be before that happens to me? And how on earth am I going to deal with looking like that? And if it doesn't happen to me, how many of my friends do I have to see that happen to? It has happened to more friends. It's the awful thing about it. And I'm still afraid. But what I do is I make myself go up and I touch their face. Sometimes I'll say I love you. Sometimes I'll give them a hug. Sometimes I'll just talk stupid things because I'm lost for words. But I make myself go through my fear, and I let them know that I still care and that they can still be touched and cared for by somebody.
About feelings of contagion and feelings of fear that come up in working with people with AIDS. I'd like to basically talk about my own fear in this part. I've had lots of fear in working with people with AIDS during the last 2 years, and that fear has subsided now by the fact that the statistics are the incubation period is 18 months. So I've celebrated that 18-month line, thinking, well, if I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it in 18 months, right? When I first started, though, working with people with AIDS, my fear was much more alive, and I was much more aware of it. And it came up a lot just in having the first support group that we did was in my living room of my home, and we would use our kitchen glasses during the support group for apple juice or whatever, and it really was more of an issue with my roommates than myself. But I'd walk out into the kitchen and there'd be the pot of water, hot water, that the glasses would be boiling in, or, that was definitely my detail to take care of the glasses after the support group. And, but I was already accelerating on a different level than the glasses, because in the support group people were crying and our faces would be next to each other and tears would be shared and people would be hugging and embracing and kissing, and at the end of the support group somebody would come up to you and give you a hug, and before you would know what was happening you'd have a kiss on the mouth, and the fear was there. I think it's real important to distinguish between homophobia and AIDS phobia. I think that homophobia is definitely, both are problems, but homophobia I think is a more deeply rooted problem which needs a lot more work. If you're afraid of people with AIDS, it doesn't mean that you're afraid of gay people. It can simply mean that you're afraid of a disease that we don't know a lot about. And I think it's important to make that distinction. I also think it's important to acknowledge your fear. And when your fear comes up, not to sort of push it down and say, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way, I should be loving and I should be open and I shouldn't be afraid to touch or be touched or whatever. But to really acknowledge what comes up for you, and maybe even to feel okay about pulling back a little bit, and certainly to feel okay about processing that fear with someone that you love. In Shanti we have the support groups where we can process that fear. But if you're working in a hospital setting or somewhere else, to find somebody on staff that you can talk to about the fear that comes up for you. You hear infection control nurses tell you that, you really don't need to worry about anything as long as you wash your hands. Well, that's fine on one level, but it really, the fear is still there. It doesn't go away just thinking that if you wash your hands, you're going to be okay. I can remember that the first time Bobby invited me over to dinner at his home, I guess it was probably over a year ago now, I was really frightened, or not really frightened, but there was definitely fear there. And I was okay about eating the stuff that Bobby cooked in the oven, but the stuff like the salad and whatnot that wasn't microwaved or baked, that brought up another whole set of fear for me. You know, part of it is going through it. I mean, part of it is just acknowledging it and then going through it. But on the same time, you can only go through it at the rate that you're ready to go through it. About 2 months ago, we were up at a resort in the Russian River with people with AIDS, and my lover and myself and one of these other men with AIDS had a wonderful connection, and we spent like 3 hours together when we were sharing the same glass during that time period. That's something that I had never done before, and it's not something that I'm advocating for you to do, but I'm saying that I was in the conscious place where that was all right with me. I wasn't afraid of doing that. And in my gut, I believe that AIDS is not something that's casually transmitted. But despite that belief, the fear still surfaces. I can remember kissing Bobby one time on the lips, and the next day he came into the office and he had an active herpes lesion on his mouth. And I think I had night sweats for 3 days after that, thinking not only do I have AIDS now, but I have herpes. You get through those periods, and they're really, I mean, anything we experience is normal. I mean, that's an important thing to start with. So, I mean, that fear is a normal thing to go through. Getting down now, I think, to a more personal level of what it's like to be the recipient of that fear. I think, Bobby, you can shed some light on that.
For the longest time, I felt like I was charmed, because the horror stories and things that I was hearing in support group or talking to the other guys about weren't happening to me. I remember the first time that Rick, my Shanti counselor, came over, he said that I need to tell you that I feel great about hugging you and touching you, but I feel uncomfortable about kissing you. And I sat with that for a second or two, and I said, okay, I can work with that, that's fine. I feel if he hadn't told me that, there would have been this thing between us, unfinished or unspoken, and I would have known it right off, and that would have just sort of, forget it. I wouldn't have been able to work with him. I went to the second National AIDS Conference in Denver, and I've been doing a lot of forums, educational type things, and I figured I'd touched a lot of lives and given information to people. And I came back from this national convention just really charged. You know, I'd talk to people from all over the country, and I'd raise their consciousness, and I'd sensitize them to the fact that we were people with AIDS, we're not victims, and we're only patients in a hospital setting. And I got a call through Shanti to come to a local TV station here for a morning talk show. And we would like to do a show about the fear and hysteria around AIDS. Great, I'm all primed, I'm ready. My friend Paul and I got there about 7:30 one morning, and we were shown to this little room, and a few minutes later the couple that was already in there was shown out. Then somebody came in and they were very, can we give you a cup of coffee? Can we get anything for you? Are you comfortable? A few minutes after that, the producer of the show comes in, shuts the door, and says, geez guys, I've got some bad news for you. Well, the scenario I created was that they could only use one of us instead of both of us, and that was fine because I'd let Paul go on. He was dressed better than I was. Well, in fact, the information he was bringing us was that the technicians on the stage refused to mic us, put this little contraption on us, come anywhere near us, or even have us walk onto the set. If we did do that, they had threatened a walkout, a strike, and they would take the whole crew with them. The show would be canceled for the day. Shock. I wasn't sure how to deal with it. My initial reaction was four-letter word beginning with F, Y-O-U. If I can't be on the stage in person, then forget it, I'm not going to participate. Paul had had something similar happen to him a month or so beforehand. He was a veteran of rejection already. He'd gone to a local radio station. They had called here at the office saying that something had come up with the staff and they were uncomfortable having a person with AIDS appear. The office called all over trying to find Paul. Well, they couldn't, and he walked into this situation at the radio station to be told that you can't come on, we won't let you in. Well, he walked around for 3 hours just dazed, not knowing where to go, where his home was, what to do. I guess because he had dealt with that before, what he told me was that, Bobby, we've got to do it. You know, they talked about setting up a remote mic or a remote camera. We've got to do it, not just for us, but for all the other guys. We've got to do it, make our statement. I said, okay, we'll go with that. We ended up talking over a phone in the dressing room, watching people being made up and looking at the names on the lockers of all the stars of their newscast. And everybody was very solicitous. And they even gave us a free coffee cup with their name on it afterwards. I went home and we decided to make an issue of this, and we called a press conference. And all I could do was sit there and cry. I just had not experienced it in this. I mean, it just came at me, and all this love and thing that I was willing to give was coming back filled with hate. You know, I'd opened myself for love and I got hate. It was real hard. The other thing that happens in my life, or has happened in my life, is that my sister, who is, my whole family is dead except for my sister. My parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, they're all dead. And so when I was diagnosed, I reached out to her to be the mother that everybody wants, to comfort them, to give them support, love, to be the father who's strong for you. You know, Daddy, hold me. This is hard. I hurt. She got pregnant and started telling me months in advance that if I become pregnant, I can't be around you. I got her doctors' names, phone numbers, nurses' names and phone numbers, informational titles of pamphlets. I sent her volumes of stuff. She was unwilling to go through that for me. And it's hard. Jim mentioned maybe last night, finding the strength in yourself. You know, I can be my mommy and my daddy to me. I can be strong, but it sure would be nice to have my sister there too.
We're going to do a role play now with Bobby talking about his sister. And Flo is going to be the counselor.
Hi Flo, how are you?
Hi Bobby. I'm doing okay today. How are you doing?
I don't know. I was on the phone this morning talking to one of the guys, you know, like we're teenagers on the phone in high school. And the call waiting came through, and I answered it. And, hi, this is Rod. I wanted to let you know that Susie had her babies today. I wasn't expecting that. She wasn't due until Thanksgiving. And I just said, are they okay? Is she all right? He said yes, and talk to you later. And I said okay, and hung up. And I went into the other room, and I just stood there. She had twins. Robert Vincent is 6 pounds and 3 ounces and 20 inches, and he was born at 8:58 a.m. And James Michael was born at 8:59. He's the puny one. He's only 4 pounds 15 and a half ounces, and he's only 18 and a half inches long.
You seem both happy and real sad at the same time.
I haven't been able to see Becky. And now here's two more. You want to take that at her? It's not fair. They're all I have.
So painful.
Instead of yelling at her, I sent her flowers. Instead of telling her I was really angry, I called her up and said, congratulations, I love you.
What do you want to say? What would you have liked to have said, Bobby?
Love me, hold me. I hurt.
Can I love you? Can I hold you?
I'm getting snot all over you.
I don't care.
Well, that was tough. As you could tell, this was a real role play. Basically what Flo did was to, again, be there with his anger, intense anger, to stay open to that. Oftentimes, if you can stay open to the anger long enough, grief, sadness will follow, and that's what happened in this situation. By not pulling away from his anger, by not trying to talk him out of his anger, but sort of riding it through with him, he came to the point of being able to go even deeper in past his anger, into his own sadness, into his own grief, and Flo was able to comfort him in that. Thank you.
I'd just like to say one thing to Bobby, too. I know none of us can take the place of your sister right now, but I'm glad that you're able to let in our love.
Thank you.